that you agree to the recording. So please check that, but just so you're aware that we will be recording. Some people have asked as they cannot join us today. Okay, so with that, good morning, everybody. My name is Angelique van der Merwe. I'm the Chief Exploration Scientist at the Human and Robotic Exploration Directorate of the European Space Agency. I'm joined here by my colleagues who will introduce themselves in a second. And we have a briefing with you today where we would like to outline a little bit where we currently are for ISS, what is the current status, what is, let's say, the next steps and the way forward for us, and also to give you a little bit of an outlook on the post-ISS landscape. I would like to ask everybody again to mute yourselves. We have a lot of people online, and otherwise this is going to get quite chaotic. So thanks for that. Maybe, Antonella, we can go to the next slide. Yes. Sharing. So maybe as we wait for the slides to catch up, I can already mention that, yeah, so where we are today is that we have a few major changes in the last few months recently that have, let's say, a big impact on utilization on ISS, and that logically so will also impact ESA's utilization on the ISS program. One is the ISS deorbit schedule, which has been announced earlier this year. And we also have, let's say, overall the availability of ISS resources. Our intent today is to just give you a little bit more explanation on what those two major changes are, as I already mentioned, and also to give you an opportunity to ask questions, because I think we can already say up front that those major changes will have, let's say, an impact also on the scientific experiments that we can still move forward on the ISS. And what I think is also something we can already address up front is that there are a lot of unknowns for which we do not yet have an answer, and we will not have an answer for you today, but we just want to make sure that you have all the information, know also the uncertainty that we have, and then of course we can discuss how we plan to move forward and how we plan to keep you also informed on that. So maybe we can go to the next slide, and then I hand over to Julia.
Can you go ahead with that meeting? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Julia Weiss. I'm the LEO and Suborbital Utilization Team Lead. And I would start to give you a short introduction into what utilization means, so that it is then clearer later on what are the cuts and what are the difficult areas. So to be an international partner on ISS, we contribute to the overall ISS program, and in return we get our allocation for utilization. So our allocation is 8.3%. So this means with our obligation that we pay, in return we get 8.3% of the available crew time for all USOS crew members, and 8.3% of the cargo transportation, upload and download. We get a certain amount of data, and we also get a crew flights for our ESA astronauts. For ESA utilization, this encompasses more than one thing. So of course, the main items that we are doing are the scientific experiments, but we also have national contributions, we have technology demonstration, education activities, and commercial activities. And the overall utilization resources that we get, we share them 70% for ESA-sponsored utilization, so mainly for science, but also for technology demonstrations and education. And 30% of this overall envelope that we have, we use for national contributions and for commercial activities. So, for example, if we have a long duration, if we have a nominal increment, and we have 4 USOS crew members on the station, like we had it in the last years, then we had like 140 hours of crew time that we could use for any of our utilization activities, and we were doing that then based on the activities that we're having, that all the different areas were getting a certain amount of crew time, and the same for condition storage, the same for upload and download. To the next slide. But then, so a lot of things were happening in the last years. So, I'm sorry, the first thing, it takes some time for me to see the slides, was at the beginning of the year, first thing that happened was in 2024, when NASA awarded SpaceX for the contract for build the deorbit vehicle. So before that, it was not really clear how the end of the station would look like. But then in that point in time, NASA really made a plan, then they did a contract and they made a timeline. So that was the first time that we really had a more reliable schedule for the end of ISS. So this USDV, this United States Deorbit Vehicle, is contracted to SpaceX, and they have a very large trunk that has additional fuel and additional thrusters so that they can really deorbit the station. They also made some backup plans in case something is happening with this vehicle while it is launching or during its way to the station, that then they have a second vehicle already procured. And in this notional plan, if you look from the back to the end, they said, okay, the re-entry should be in January 2031, and the last crew will already depart before. So the last crew will depart 6 to 8 months before the re-entry, so mid-2030. And these crew members, it will only be 2 crew members, and they will arrive a year before. So the last 2 crew members will already arrive in mid-2029. Difficult. And this target vehicle will also arrive before. So they will arrive 1.5 years before the re-entry. So more or less at the same time frame like the last crew. So in mid-2029, we will start in a period where much less resources will be available because we will have only 2 crew members, 2 USS crew members, no Russian crew members, and we will have a limited amount of docking ports available because we have the US deorbit vehicle on 1 docking port, we have 1 crew vehicle, and we will already have another docking port to be potentially given to the Axiom station when it undocks from ISS. And on top, already before, the station will start to be lowered. Back for a second. Sorry, wasn't there yet. Like in mid-2028, so even before the USDV is coming, the station starts already slowly to lower the orbit. So they will already stop to do the boosts to bring the station up really quite a way forward. So now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So in the original plan, we assumed that we will have a full utilization till end of 2030, but with what you have seen on the slide before, already like mid-2029, we will have a decrease of activities. So we will have a decrease of vehicles. There will be not so much docking ports available. So this means there will be less download as well. There will be less crew time when we only have the 2 crew members at the end. And of course, once the station will be uncrewed, we may have very limited possibilities to pursue any utilization. So already in that time, we did an assessment what this means and had a look into all our complement to see which items will be hard to be implemented in time with this new scenario. So already in that time point, we already had some activities that we stopped or reoriented. Go to the next one. So, but then in this year, of course, as you all know from the news, the situation changed much more. So NASA funding will cut significantly already for the fiscal year for this year, but also we have a lot of unknowns for the next fiscal year. And we see that NASA is implementing cuts already now during this, even if there are still a lot of unknowns. What we see, but it's not yet clear, is that they may have fewer USOS crew members. So there were a lot of discussion on cutting the USOS crew members flying on a SpaceX already with the next flight, that is beginning of next year. But we see now that they don't do it yet. But there was the idea to cut from 4 USOs crew member permanently on the station to 3. So this would mean we have 1 person less that we could target for human research, but also less crew time for everyone. And also they have longer increments, so 8 months instead of 6 months. So this also means we will have less crew members in total coming, so less subjects available. And this has already been implemented. We also see that NASA is reducing the amount of cargo vehicles, and here we have we know the least at the moment. So we don't know yet the amount of cargo vehicles available till the end of ISS, and we also don't really know in which rhythm they will come. So here but we know that it will be less than we had in mind in the beginning. And what NASA is also doing to save budget due to the budget cuts is that there will be less conditioned storage available. And this they're already implementing also with the start of next year. So it means they will not fly as many polars and as many double coldbacks and as many Merlins as before. We're saying they will reduce half of it. Now we see that on the next flights it will be a bit more, but on top they will also try to retire the Merlins at all. So they are trying not to use them at all anymore, offer them. And all the conditioned storage is under the NASA control. So before we knew all about this, we were assuming that we get 280 hours of prime crew time for ESA for utilization from 2025 to 2029. Of course, perhaps also a bit in 2030, that we will have like 3 tons of upload till the end of ISS for the ESA activities, and that we will have access to 7 long duration mission crews to crew 11, and that all these 7 long duration mission crews are contained by 4 crew members, and that we will have access to conditioned storage on all the visiting vehicles. But of course, this now has a lot of is impacted by the NASA cuts, because since you have seen we are 8.3% of everything, if the overall amount is cut, also our 8.3% are less. So what we did in summer this year, and of course are still discussing and assessing, is how do we react to the situation, and especially to all of these unknowns. So we know that there are a lot of constraints in crew time, in the amount of crew members, up and download, and conditioned storage. So these are the 4 things that are the borders or the boundary conditions that we have to take into account. But then, of course, we looked into not only these things, we looked also for all projects, what is the maturity, what is the scientific merit. There were peer reviews done again for most of the activities already. And of course, what is very important, we want to keep a balanced scientific complement. So, because we have a lot of different activities and each area is impacted by another fact. For example, the human research needs a lot of crew time and numbers of subjects. So the reduction in number of subjects and in crew time is impacting a lot of the human research. Biology needs a lot of conditioned storage and also a bit of human research, but mainly biology. So the reduction in conditioned storage is impacting biology experiment. The physical science needs a lot of upload usually, because we have bigger facilities that then have a throughput and needs upload constantly. So there is a lot of impact on the physical science due to the reduction of expected up and download. So all the areas are impacted, and since we are sharing commercial activities, science activities, tech demos, and national contributions, the impact will be on all sides. So we did an assessment where we really discussed with all different stakeholders within ESA. So of course, mainly with the science team providing the scientific merit, but also programmatic aspects. We talked to operations, and we looked into the development schedules of all the payloads. We did a big exercise to understand where do we stand, and put all activities that we're having into a big priority list. And then on the next slide, please. We think we will find ourselves in one of the two scenarios, but potentially somewhere in between. But we are assuming, due to what NASA was announcing, that we need to count on a 50% cut. So we will end up with only 1.5 tons for upload and around 600 hours of crew time. So we will set up a baseline scenario where we can still use these resources, and it means we still have a high risk on condition storage and a high risk on upload of big facilities, but we would still be able to cover around 60% of the planned activities that were in our complement. But if the situation gets even worse, and would then be the minimum scenario, then we think we would perhaps even only get around 650 kilograms of upload and around 540 hours of crew time, something like this. And then, of course, in this scenario, we would be even more restricted. And here we would have much more problems to upload big items. So here we will have much more cuts on the upload. And also here we still have a high risk on the condition storage needs. And in total, we could still cover around 50% of the planned complement. But of course, there are items that doesn't mean 50% of the big items or that may not be then in that have a higher impact. The problem is we don't really know yet where we end up. Will it be more scenario 1 or more scenario 2? And we are waiting, of course, of getting more information from the NASA side. That at the moment is very difficult since they are now in shutdown and there's no open communication. We get some information, but it will take a bit longer till we see really the numbers that we were expecting next month. So we still hope that there is more information next month, but it depends a lot on the situation in the US. And of course, next month we also have the ministerial conference on our side where we need to understand what is the situation from the member states, how much funding will be available for all the activities. So these two items need to come together in the next months so that we hope that we have a clearer understanding by beginning of next year where we end up. But we know by now already that we will not keep what we had in the complement before all these changes. So there will be activities that will be in all scenarios that we say, okay, even if we go to the minimum scenario, we will be able to do these 50% of activities, and other activities where we say, okay, if we have a better situation, then we can hopefully go to this new baseline, and then we have a good scenario still that have all the different areas covered. So we will still have physical science, biology, human research, tech demos, commercial activities, and national contributions and education. So we want to keep a balance in complement for all cases. Some activities we will put something in that will be called like backup activities, because since we don't really know where we end up, we don't really know what perhaps happens in 2 years or in 3 years from now, there may be more opportunities than we know in the beginning. So we don't want to then have opportunities upcoming and no activities to be done. So we will have a lot of backup activities that we think can be added easily if we get an opportunity. And they are also from the nature that even if they cannot be added to ISS, they are flexible so that we could perhaps add them on another platform. So we are hoping that this can then be a kind of a backup pool for ISS, but also an opportunistic pool for new platforms that may come up. And we will talk about this also later in the presentation. From all the activities that we think we cannot, I mean, there may be activities, there are for sure activities that we also recommend to descope from ISS. And what this means will need to be assessed for each activities where we recommend a descoping. So for all these activities, we need to look into every single one to discuss the scientific merit, the maturity, possibility, like feasibility to do it on a different platform, because some may be easy to be implemented somewhere else, others not. And there we will then discuss with each team really individual to say, okay, for this activity, we would propose this, we would propose that. And of course, there we also then need to have a good understanding from the science community if they're interested to go to somewhere else as well. And also for the like industry to understand what would it mean for the experiment to be implemented somewhere else. Then there are some activities that we discuss, not necessarily only with our member states, but there are also other stakeholders. For example, the commercial partners, the member states that have a national contribution, and we have some activities that are like ESA tech demos that also need to be discussed more in detail once we know really where we end up, how many resources we will have available. Then we have quite some member states that are working right now to prepare for PAM missions, like we had for Axiom 4 and Axiom 3. The resources that are procured during a PAM mission are not part of this overall allocation that we have with NASA for our ISS complement. So these are not considered in the assessment that we were doing because they are assumed to fly on a PAM mission and can be implemented on a PAM mission. So they would not fall into the same category, and then they would not be handled in the same pool.
Yeah, so maybe just to comment, let's say, because I can imagine that even though we give you the high-level summary, this raises quite some questions also on your side and what this might mean, particularly for your experiment. Now, there are some science teams to which we have already spoken one-on-one in the last few weeks. So these people are already a little bit more aware. We will also reach out to some other science teams in the next few weeks, where we see, for example, where there's really a high risk with the current boundary conditions that we have of flying still on ISS. So as Julia already outlined, there are two key factors that will really determine, let's say, for us to know exactly what we can or cannot do. One is, of course, the situation on the NASA side and also the outcome of the fiscal year 2026. This we do not know when to expect. We hope it will obviously come very soon. The shutdown has now been ongoing for quite a while, so we hope that this will be resolved very soon, but this is really a first important element. Then, as already said, at the end of November, we also have our ministerial conference where our member states will decide both on, let's say, ISS and post-ISS activities. And this is also for us really important to know exactly where our member states want to prioritize and also, again, what resources we will have available to potentially redirect or kickstart some activities, for example, also on post-ISS platforms. What we would like to propose is on top of, let's say, those one-on-ones for certain science teams that will come, is that we plan a new community briefing where we can keep you up to date. But given that we are so dependent on these other steps, we would propose to do it not earlier than January 26th. By that time, we hopefully have been able to digest also the outcome of the ministerial conference. If needed, we have been able to prioritize activities. So I think this would give us a good timing for us to come back to you and to hopefully give you a little bit more of an outlook. I just want to stress that we are very much aware that this is not at all the news you are hoping for. I can only stress that this is for sure also not the news that we like to deliver to you at all. But unfortunately, this is the reality that we are today facing with. So what we are really trying, and I really want to emphasize that together with all the teams on our side and also with our member states, is really to come to an optimized situation as good as possible. But it should be noted, nobody is winning in this scenario. This is a loss for the community. It's a loss for us. It's a loss for our member states. It's a loss for industry. So this, unfortunately, is not something we can avoid as it currently stands. We are just trying to make sure that we can minimize that loss as good as possible and that we can try and save as much of the science moving forward. But again, this is not a straightforward task, and there's many elements that we need to consider. So we fully understand that this raises probably quite some questions and concerns on your side. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please know you can also reach out to us individually, and we will try our best to give you as much information as we can. But as mentioned before, there are many unknown situations right now, which makes it very hard for us to tell you yes or no, or to give a very clear answer. Maybe just one last point before we go, let's say a little bit to hopefully a more positive message for post-ISS, is that we are working very closely with our member states. not only in terms of asking them for funding for new activities moving forward, but also, let's say, at a more technical level and scientific level, to explain to them the exercise we have done on our side, to outline what that would potentially mean, and to really work with them to also understand their priorities and to understand how they can best support you as science teams in this activity. So I just want to outline that. So also here, if you have any questions, please also feel free to reach out to your delegation, because I think this is something that we're all in together, and of course we can try to do this as good as possible. Maybe we can go to.
I have one thing, sorry.
Yeah, of course.
I just one thing to add before we go to the next topic, because I mean, as said, we already contacted some teams, not only, I mean, some teams already, because we know that the activities are on high risk, or we needed to take decisions already. So we didn't want to wait, or we couldn't wait. But also we contacted a lot of teams asking questions about what is really your minimum scenario, what is really the required things you can move into most compressed and minimized, because we're really trying to fit as many things together there as possible. And if we see that something, oh, this activity is really difficult to implement because of the conditioned storage footprint or the size of the hardware, we really look for small changes even to make things happen. So it is not so it's not only one team who got these questions. We are really looking into this for everyone in all activities to make sure that overall we can implement as much as possible and as many teams and as many science as possible. So please, when we are coming, or the scientist team or the technical officer is coming with these kind of questions, or the PIM, be open and to think about that this might be the point that we are dwelling on to make sure that we can find a solution for your experiment and for other experiments. So it is not the time to really try to stick to as much as biggest scenario that you have in mind. Really try to be open to have some cuts to make sure that we can implement your experiment and other experiments in the overall complement.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. I think that's a good addition. Yeah, again, we fully understand that this is far from an ideal situation. We understand that a lot of you have a lot riding on this, that you have grants, that you have a team and PhD students and postdocs who really depend on this. We also understand industry has teams who are working on this. That's also why we say this is not at all an exercise that we have taken lightly or take lightly, even now. We are really trying to do our best, but of course we also have only a certain, let's say, number limited of options that we can try, and we're just trying to do our best to fit as much as we can in that. And then, as Julia already mentioned, for those where it makes sense and where we see relevance, we are also looking into other options, not ISS, but what can we do on other platforms. But again, here we also depend a little bit on the resources and again, the decisions that our member states will make in order for us to enable that. But just we have really tried to make the message to them, and I think they have also understood that a lot depends on this. Yeah, maybe we can go to the post-ISS outlook. We would just like to share a little bit upcoming activities or ongoing activities, which again, hopefully share a little bit a more positive message than what we have just spoken to you in the last half hour. So just one element to stress, and this is just very high level, is the acceleration to, let's say, the post-ISS transition. Julia already mentioned the deorbit timeframe. You've gotten a little bit of an outlook there. We also have on the US side the Commercial Leo Destination, or CLD program. Also here in the last few months, there have been a little bit of changes also with changing NASA leadership and the ongoing, let's say, funding situation on the US. It's still TBD how this will currently materialize. But just to note that also on the ESA side, we're following this very closely because, of course, we will also depend strongly a little bit on that. Maybe we can go to the next slide, and this is a little bit more focused on ESA. This is maybe a little bit, I mean, it's not a complicated slide, but just to show is that how ESA can participate in the post-ISS landscape. There are three potential scenarios, which we have also, let's say, iterated with member states, and they each, let's say, have a very different approach and commitment also in terms of resources and investment from the ESA side. Scenario one is where we purely rely on US commercial providers, so US CLD services, meaning Europe would not make any investments in infrastructure. This is where we would just buy services from the US. You can imagine that this, of course, strategically is a little bit less interesting, and we would definitely have no autonomy in this first scenario. Then you have scenario 2, which is a little bit the middle ground between the three. This is where you have some European infrastructure investments, but where at the same time you also still rely on the US commercial providers. So it's a little bit of a mix, meaning you can have some autonomy in certain elements. At the same time, you also rely still on some services and, let's say, the availability of US commercial providers. Then scenario 3 is the other end of the spectrum. This is where you would have a European, let's say, let or co-let lowered orbit outpost, where you can also have, of course, contributions from partners. But this is where we would really be independent and autonomous, and where we really lead, let's say, based on a European consortium, and then work with partners that can either be institutional or commercial. So you can see that depending on the scenario that our member states will decide on, this will look very differently on how we will operate and also, for example, do science in lowered orbits. I think if you click, there's a few animations still.
Yeah.
So after discussions with member states, we are currently focusing on scenario 2 as the baseline scenario, although our member states have also asked us to study in more detail scenario 3, and a lot of effort has gone in, especially in the last few months, into really looking into, okay, what is scenario 3? How would that look like? How much would it cost? What's the timeline? What is feasible? What is not? So we are currently still, let's say, having the two, which we will continue hopefully to study in parallel. But again, here member states will also make a decision at the ministerial in a few weeks from now. What does it mean for the science community? The idea is really that for some elements, we will move to payload services. And we will talk a little bit more about that in a second. We really are trying to have more frequent flight opportunities, especially as we diversify the platforms that we might have. Right now, of course, we have ISS, but we hope that in the post-ISS landscape, we will have a variety of opportunities available for the community. And we also would like that we have, let's say, more frequent flights, for example, with let's say, same equipment, meaning that we can have more samples and more repeated measures. I think we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and then I hand over to Antonella.
Yeah. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Antonella Sgambati, and I am the LEO payload team lead in HRD under Julia for the LEO utilization. So mainly our team is the one that is leading with all the ISS payload right now. And according to the discussion as have been presented this morning, we will have for sure a follow-up for each of the payload that is under development, and you can reach us in order to have more clarification as needed. But today I want to take the chance also to present an activity that is approaching the deadline, because it's in 2 days, have been published at the beginning of September, and is in line on what on the new opportunistic task, let's say, to explore a end-to-end service. So mainly has been published a call for proposal for an end-to-end LEO utilization service. This call for proposal has the intent to be a little bit more like in the scenario 1 that Angelique presented before. So an opportunistic chance to fly science on outposts that can be available in the time frame 2026-2029. So means that while the ISS is still running, we can start to learn how to approach a service procurement, what this will mean, how will be this implemented, because it will be also something new on his side, because this has been never done before. So we want to use this time where a lot of dynamic opportunity are coming in the LEO outpost with the several commercial LEO destination and service provider, in order to create a complementary path where we can perform science. And due to that, we thought for this first call of proposal, 3 different scenarios for the end-to-end service. So the one is that ESA will still take the leadership in the science selection process. So meaning with the AO process and the selection of the science. And then we are going to implement the selected science in the end-to-end experiment scenario of the service that has been selected. The other one that we marked as preferred in the current call for proposal is a experiment in science. So mainly the provider also conduct the science AO process, let's say, the science selection, but then ESA always select the science that need to be performed. Is more a sort of outsourcing of the process to select the science and not the selection of the science itself. That this is still under accountability of ESA. And ESA, in fact, retained the file approval. The last scenario is hosting, operating, and returning. So that ESA or the provider that is aligned to the criteria that have been made applicable to the call for proposal will going to propose an experiment that can be even just to create a synergy on what was discussed before, some of the backup experiment, some of the experiment that can be even accommodate in other outposts. So this gives us a possibility also to already explore the orientation. And in this case, we have two possibilities that the provider can propose some experiment or ESA can propose like a customer furnished item, an experiment to be accommodated. These are the 3 current scenarios that have been outlined in the call for proposal. We are waiting for the deadline that to see how many participant bidders find this call interesting. And if in case we have a funding after the ministerial and this pilot call for proposal seems to be successful of interest, we have really an opportunity, also strategic point of view in the future. This more will come using also this first pilot case as a lesson learned. What is important here, in case you had the chance to go through the document and the activity description, is that also scientists can make consortia directly with the service provider, so that these 2 communities that today are the audience of this briefing find also a bridging point where they can propose something together that makes sense. So this is this activity is really a pioneeristic one, at least on our side, also for the procurement policy. So we are really glad to see the outcome, and this also we can bring something to the next ISS briefing as an outcome to keep you posted on this activity. So the other aspect, due to that, in the scenario 2 and scenario 3 in the post-ISS framework that Angelique was presenting, in case we are going to support our European industry that are doing a partnership with the US CLD, or if we are going to build or support our European LEO outpost, we were thinking of a sort of backbone research commodity that act as an enabler for all the science that need to be performed on board and also research. So we made a list of the commodities going from cold storage, incubator, microscopy, external platform, plus additional more cost-modified hardware like PCR machine or blood speed centrifuge. And we made this list. We went to ask to the CLD provider, the one that they found of most interest, major interest in order to be implemented in their outpost. And a globe box that is between life science globe box and material science globe box is the element that create a bit more consensus and more interest. So knowing that and looking to the full roadmap, the globe box has been identified as an early item that we are going to procure and develop. And will be not a standard globe box like a rebuild of the MSG or a rebuild of the LSG. Will be what we call the globe bench, because from our assessment of the utilization of the globe box on either side, in particular, we used the MSG globe box. That more than for the level of containment, we used the MSG globe box due to the factor, shape factor, and freedom in accommodating hardware on the cold plate and give us a possibility to be less bounded to an insert. So the idea is to have this globe bench that can have a working volume up to 4 middle lockers, or so like a double middle locker equivalent, that will be equipped with a dedicated kit on top that allow to be transformed and changed in a globe box for material, can be UV shielding, can be different type of multi-purpose bench that allow you also to be a globe box. We will release this in open competition in procurement next year. The plan is to have a 2-flight model that the globe box itself as a procurement can be also used in case we are in scenario 2 as exchange of value with the CLD provider, that we give you the globe box and you can use, keeping ESA as anchor customer as a priority, but you can also use this globe box for other customers, and as a change of value, I can accommodate payload for free, for example. Or this part of the agreement is something that we are going to discuss in the implementation phase. And in case we are going to have in European outpost, of course, the globe box that we are developing is going to be accommodated. So these are the new activity in addition to other one that maybe you have already seen in these in the upcoming months, that will be some co-development activity on middle locker procurement. This is an important aspect that I would like to take a chance to underline, because it's a long time that ESA was not procuring middle locker, because mainly on ISS our rec are not express rec. So, but now knowing that the middle locker equivalent as a form factor standard is going to be available as accommodation on all the CLD, but also on the recoverable, most of the recoverable autonomous platform, we are going to support with the co-development what will be an enabler seed to establish later on a service in order to have multiple accommodation on a permanent outpost or on a retrieval platform. So this is also another activity that you will see is coming, like was for Marine in the life science in the phase 0A 1 year and a half ago, and now we are moving on for the procurement of the development service. We are establishing the same also for physics science, and this is important because, as was anticipated, our goal is to provide a balanced portfolio and so also balanced opportunity.
Maybe just one additional point we want to emphasize is that, and I think so, many of you might have been involved even in that, is that in 2023 we have set up several facility definition teams, or FDTs, particularly for low Earth orbit, where we really wanted to work very closely with the scientific community, also to understand what are the interests and what are the scientific recommendations, let's say, for scientific capabilities in low Earth orbit. And we had 7 FDTs, and you can see the full list here: material sciences, plant cultivation, atomic clock, fluid physics, soft matter, ultra cold atoms, and bioculture, or Asclepius, which is basically a lab and a medical toolkit, which wants to focus on the one hand on, let's say, crew health diagnostics and treatment two-way, and at the same time also have biology capabilities for research. We are proposing several studies to really kickstart and look more into detail in what this could look like in a post-ISS landscape. And so we have this in our program proposal for the upcoming ministerial. And again, here, this is of course where we will wait also how our member states view this and how much funding we will have available to start. And we have already started one, as Antonella said, based on a mid-deck locker principle, where we will have very standardized and versatile modular equipment. This was specifically also for physical sciences with some in situ diagnostics. There we already have the approval from our member states to start, and we will come out also with that opportunity in the next few weeks to months. And then just the last slide that we want to mention, because I think this is probably a question that some of you might also have, is on the autonomous platforms. So we have been working very closely, and this is led also by our commercial team in HRE, where they have organized a request for information and then a subsequent workshop with automated platform providers. The workshop was in September. So we are really trying to understand what are the capabilities they can bring, what do they have available, what's their timeline, what's their cost, because we are really interested in these autonomous automated platforms. And we see them really as a very good, let's say, standalone means as well, especially to cater to biology and physical sciences research in LEO. So we really want to also kickstart some activities there. Pending the funding we will get, we also plan to release an announcement of opportunity for science, I would say somewhere in the course of next year, again, depending on how the ministerial goes. And then, as Antonella already explained, for the call for the end-to-end services, again, also pending the funding, so there's a lot pending here, but hopefully we will get that, is that we might then also release a follow-up call where we target in particular also the automated platform. So we really hope that in the short to medium term, we can also offer some opportunities for the community here. I think this was our last slide. We understand that we have thrown a lot of information to you. We understand you might have many questions. What we would like to propose is that you can use the chat to type any questions. We can also try by speaking, but we have many people online, so this might turn out to be a little bit chaotic, but of course we can try. If you could either type in the chat or raise your hands, we will try to go through the questions you will have and try to answer them as good as possible. And as I already mentioned, if you feel uncomfortable asking your question here in front of everybody, please also know that you can reach out to us. We will follow up with, let's say, the slides and a link to the recording, and we can also give you our contact details in case you would not have them yet. But in any case, what you can always do is reach out to your project scientist, for example, and from there, the questions will also come to us.
Can you read the questions?
I stop the sharing, that so I can also.
Oh yeah, perhaps keep sharing, so in case we need
Okay.
to. Go
Yeah,
back to
I
one.
see. I see one
Okay.
question on the slides. Yes, we will distribute them. So we will just create a PDF, and I mean we will ask then the project scientists who have also reached out to you earlier to make sure you get that information. Then there's a question on more information about the AO for automated platforms. I think there's not a lot of extra information we can give right now. What we would plan is that, again, once we know we have the funding confirmed, is that we go out with an AO. And what we would like to, of course, hope is that we can make sure that we give also a little bit the capabilities that we know will be available on, let's say, the majority or on average in the different providers that would be there. So scientists can target a little bit their proposals also to what would be available in what time frame. So we see this really particularly for biology and physical sciences. But again, we will, if we do this community briefing in January, I think we will have a better understanding of whether we will be able to go out. And if so, when we would be able to go out, and we can also, let's say, give a little bit more detail then. I don't know if there's any other questions. I see nothing in the chats and also no hands raised. Let's maybe wait a second.
No, there's one. Okay. If NASA pulls 50% of funding, the ESA contribution is no longer 8.3%. Okay, so There are 2 points. Perhaps I try to explain it. There's one point where NASA, of course, there's a certain funding for the science community in the US that is provided by the government, and that is also cut. But if it comes to the resources and the allocation, if NASA reduces the overall amount of available resources, we will always get 8.3% of what is available. It's not that they get less and we get more, it's we get 8.3% of the less that is available. So but I mean, if they say we upload less utilization hardware, we only have like 1 ton instead of 2 tons or something, then we get 8.3% of the 1 ton. So it is really if NASA in that sense is deciding to reduce a certain resource, it's not that we can easily just take them, because we are participating in the overall partnership by 8.3%.
So yeah, maybe just to add is that indeed, as Julia is saying, the 8.3% stays the same, but the absolute value will be lower in the end. So that's it's not like indeed we would be getting more. And in the end, it's also something obviously we need to pay for. So even if we would be able to get more, which is not at all the case, but then this would also come, of course, with a higher cost to us. So it's not just something that we would get, so to say. So I think this is also needs to be a little bit reflected. I think the second question, maybe Antonella, is something you can answer. So can you please clarify what a customer furnished item is for hardware in scenario 3 for the call for proposals? And does that mean ESA will supply the hardware or that scientists will supply the hardware?
Yeah, it's a terminology that is used to say when ESA is providing an hardware, in this case, so that to an entity that can be the service provider. So it's ESA supplied hardware, hardware including software, depends if we are talking about an experiment, to a provider that has more the task to host, integrate the hardware and operate. So it's like we are developing, we have already developed an experiment that has its own science, but instead to be accommodated on board of ISS, we are accommodating on this new service provider outpost, and then the hardware is provided by us. So it's a NISA hardware, so one of the experiment hardware that we have developed that is our fixed asset or not, and they can be provided.
And then I think the next question we cannot really answer. What is the likelihood of scenario 3 involving a European crude outpost actually coming to fruition?
I think this is really a very high-level political decision. A lot will depend, of course, also on the cost and the resources that are needed. And that's why I think a lot more work needs to be put into that. And that's what we are hoping our member states will allow us to do in the next program period. So we have, as I mentioned, activities for scenario 2, which we already started now, and a study for scenario 3. The idea is that in the next program period, again, if member states agree and provide the resources for that, is that we would continue to study that heavily in the next program period so that we can put all cards on the table for then member states to make a well-informed decision at the next ministerial. But I think it's very hard to say what is the likelihood that this is a really political decision in that sense.
And the next question is, I did not see a LEO FTT for exposure science, cosmochemistry, astrobiology. Is one planned?
So indeed, this is a good question. We didn't have one for low Earth orbit, as you might recall. We had one for Gateway in particular, and let's say for METIS, for exposure science, and let's say moon orbit. This was, let's say, the first focus we put also in terms of resources on the ESA side. We didn't have, let's say, for MVPs in the Earth. These were the ones that were prioritized, taking into account that we have the latest MVP for, let's say, beyond low Earth orbit. I think we can learn a lot from what has been done in that MVT for LEO. And if we see a need to have something very dedicated, this is definitely something we could still look into. or we could work, for example, through other mechanisms like topical teams and things like that. So I hope that answers the question. No other questions?
Yeah. If the ISS resources are cut 50%, does it mean also the ESA funding contribution is cut 50%? Is that cut on the table of 725? So that it's a bit a difficult question, no? Because there are 2 points that you need to consider. On the one side is our contribution to the ISS program. And even if there will be less resources, it does not mean that the contribution will be less money. So it may even stay the same, even if we get less utilization resources. And then on the other hand, for our internal science, in general, our goal is not to reduce our scientific throughput, not to reduce what we are working on right now. So we are trying not to do the same as the US. Of course, we need to see if the available resources are cut, how much of our activities that we have in the complement can we really do. But we don't, for now, we don't foresee that this will mean that we cut a lot of experiments. We will try to implement as much as possible on ISS and try to find perhaps other solutions for some of the other activities. And even like, as you have seen in the slides, there are these backup activities that we will still pursue, even if there is a risk that we don't fly them. So we, in that sense, we try to go ahead with as many activities as possible from the things that we already kicked off. For the funding for new activities in the next period, let's say, I don't know, Angelique, if you want to add something for that part.
For the funding of new activities, I think this is, we have of course made a plan on what we would like to do, and this is what we have also outlined in the program proposal. We gave a little bit of detail in what this particularly means, also for the autonomous platforms and for CLDs in general. This is now up to our member states to decide, but of course with the current situation that we have, where we know we will not be able to fly everything to ISS, what our member states will also need to tell us is whether they want to prioritize taking what has been in the pool for ISS and fly that first before we select new activities, whether we do a mix of the two, or whether they prefer to work on new activities. And this, I think, is something, again, we have started the conversation with them. We have presented now every quarter to them on this, and have also had several bilaterals with several countries. So we also hope from them to get a little bit of a strong direction one way or the other. I assume we will go into a mix where we will take whatever is feasible from the ISS portfolio, so to say, that we cannot fly, and try to find a new home for some of those activities, and at the same time also start some new activities. This is what I expect. Again, this is not a decision. This we will need to see afterwards.
Okay, then the next question is on the glove box. Could you provide more details on the glove box? What is the planning for the actual RFP? Why do you call it optical bench?
Yeah, so the time for I'm trying to find also the slide. So I call optical bench because mainly the idea is to have like a cold plate area with the patterns of fixation, like is a optical bench look like, because allow you to have a sort of alignment of also instrument. So in case we don't use with a glove box kit, it can be a cold plate optical bench that allow also to perform other type of research, not only to run the experiment. The plan is that we would like to come with the request for proposal, mainly the ITT, in the Q1 26. Due to that, this is an activity that will require also the involvement of the CLD provider that then they are going to host Before we start, we are having bilateral discussion in order to understand what would be the interface requirement. And then we can write the system requirement document in the way that this globe box can be accommodated in any of these destinations. So the plan, this will require a little bit time, but by Q1 26, we should be out. And for the optical globe bench is more this visual idea of it, like the optical plane, but with a globe box that can become a kit that you can add on it to transform it. I hope that this clarifies.
So then there is the next question is for the combination of the scenarios. If this is possible, e.g. scenario 2 for crewed options, scenario 3 for autonomous flying experiments. So I think that's a bit like just wording and explanation. We try to diversify the platforms as much as possible. So for sure, we are planning to use autonomous platforms independently to which scenario we go for crewed platforms. So these three scenarios are three scenarios for crewed platforms. And independently to which scenario in the end we will go, we will also use automated platforms on top. And for sure in parallel, because we want to diversify and we want to have not the same situation again that we are dependent on only one platform and like we have it now for ISS. But as for example said, perhaps in this call for proposals that is out now, if we use a platform in this call for proposals that has no European infrastructure, then it would be scenario 1. Doesn't mean that we may not choose in the same CFP something that is using scenario 2. So we are really open for that, but we want to diversify as much as possible. The next question is, how will this affect the Bartolomeo external platform? So I guess it's for the cuts. So we, of course, discussing this with Airbus, who is a commercial provider of Bartolomeo, and we are discussing in the partnership how this is impacted, but this is not for the whole community. Yeah.
Let's see if there's more questions.
Yes, let's give them some time. Let's see if someone is.
If there are no further questions, then I propose we close for today. As mentioned, we will follow up with a link to the recording and slides. This might take a few days, but know that this will come. As mentioned as well, we will reach out to some science teams still in the next few days for a one-on-one discussion to explain a little bit more for particular issues that we need to discuss on how to best move forward. And we will, as mentioned earlier, also plan an updated briefing, let's say not earlier than January, but I hope we can have it in January to give you a little bit of an update on where we are today. Again, we will have a little bit more understanding and decisions will be made both on hopefully on NASA's side and on our side at the ministerial. And this can then help us to give you a more, let's say, detailed and dedicated outlook also of the steps to take. Thank you very much for being here today. Again, we understand this is a lot of information and not necessarily the information you were hoping for, but thank you very much for being here. And of course, if you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Stop recording.
Yeah.